So hey everyone, welcome to today's class. So today we are going to study about another database service. So this is also pretty interesting. It's serverless in nature and it's pretty amazing. So the service name is called as Amazon DynamoDB, and this is AWS's non-relational database. It's key value store, you could call it as, and it's horizontally scalable. So as and when you keep adding data, it keeps scaling, right? And the maximum size of data that you can store is around 400 KB, if I'm not mistaken. But let's deep dive and get to know more about its feature, right? So Amazon DynamoDB is a key value and document database, right? It's pretty similar to MongoDB, as you could call it, because that's also non-relational in nature. And this delivers a single digit millisecond performance at any scale. You could also add a caching feature, which we will see in the subsequent slides, that also increases that millisecond to become microsecond based performance, right? It's fully managed, multi-regional, multi-master, and we'll be seeing one such use case today regarding multi-master and what that actually means. And it's also a durable database with built-in security in terms of data at rest, with backup and restore options for you to create snapshots. And it also has that in-memory caching feature for that microsecond based latency, right? So we will read more about that in-memory caching feature. And DynamoDB can handle up to more than 10 trillion requests per day and can support up to peaks of 20 million requests per second. So just think about how scalable this data store is, right? And hundreds and thousands of AWS customers have actually chosen DynamoDB as their key value and document database for different use cases. So it could be for mobile-based applications, for web-based applications, where you need that kind of latency. Again, you can go for gaming-based applications or IoT-based applications where you're streaming data and storing them into DynamoDB, right? And these data are bytes in size or kilobytes in size. Like probably you would go ahead and send all of your data to a streaming service of AWS on the AWS ecosystem like Kinesis and so on. And then from Kinesis, what you would probably do is use a data analytics application or probably use Firehose in order to, use a Lambda function over there in order to transform your data and then store it into DynamoDB. So either way is possible. So you can go ahead and stream all of your data and at the same time store it into DynamoDB. That's how amazing DynamoDB is when it comes to IoT based applications and so on. And for that, you will have to create a new table for your application and let DynamoDB handle the rest, because it's a managed service from AWS. It's fully managed. RDS, I would say, is partially managed, but then DynamoDB is a fully managed service. So literally everything from the infrastructure part of it is being taken care of by AWS. So where would you probably use DynamoDB for? Some of the use cases would be for powerful web-based applications that can automatically scale up and down, and you don't need to maintain any servers. So when you compare this with RDS, where we spoke about relational databases and all that, we were still spawning up servers, right, with a particular capacity, and then you would provision your EBS volumes and so on. So you don't need to monitor or maintain any of that, right, because AWS is managing all of your infrastructure for you. So you don't need to maintain any servers, and your application has that automated high availability feature, because within that region, DynamoDB's data is stored across multiple availability zones in order to provide you with that durable database storage, right? And you can use DynamoDB and AWS AppSync, which is another service for you to build interactive mobile-based web apps with real-time updates, offline data access, and data sync, right? So that is one particular use case where you can do that. And again, obviously, anytime you build microservices and you want to think about a serverless data store or a key value pair data store, that is probably following the base properties rather than the asset properties, right? So you could think of DynamoDB as one of your data stores for that kind of fast performance and consistent capability. But then when you want some kind of transactional a related data store where you want to do a lot of transactions, you want that feature of commit, rollback, and all that, then probably you would go for RDS, where you would choose either one of the engines of MySQL, PostgreSQL, and so on. But then when you want a serverless data store where everything is being managed by AWS and you're okay with going with the non-relational characteristics of DynamoDB, I would suggest it's a really good data store. Yeah. So some of the features regarding DynamoDB, things that you have to think about are you have tables, you have items, you have attributes. So when you start off with DynamoDB, you start creating tables, right? And then the second one is called as items, wherein within each and every table, you store a lot of items. So one good example would be in a people table, each item represents a person. For a cars table, each item represents one vehicle. Okay. And finally, you have attributes. Like each and every item itself is composed of one or more attributes. So attribute is like a fundamental data element, right? So for example, an item in a people table can contain attributes called as person ID, last name, first name, and so on. And for a department table, an item might have attributes such as department ID, name, manager, and so on. So you could think of all the different attributes that a particular item can have within a database. So let's look at some diagrams so that you get more clarity. So you can see in this people table that we have some attributes. So since it's horizontally scalable, the more number of columns you add, the more more amount of data that you keep adding, the more new columns are being created for you. So this is the first data set, and then you could call this as the second data set, wherein you have extra fields such as the address and so on. And then in this third data set, you do have something called as favorite color, right? But then why is this person ID alone in caps and in bold, right? Because that is your partition key. So a simple primary key, you can call this as a primary key in your relational database, but when it comes to DynamoDB's terminology, you call it as a partition key. It is composed of one or more attributes, right? And the main purpose of using a partition key is because DynamoDB uses that partition key's value as an input to an internal hash function, and it determines that it's unique in nature, right? You are using your partition key in order to do searching capabilities and so on, right? So in a table that has only one partition key, no two items can have the same partition key value. So I can't have a person ID with 101 and another item in the table having person ID 102, or another item having person ID 101 again over here, right? That's not possible. So no two partition key values can be the same, or you could call it as no two primary key values can be the same. It has to be unique in nature, right? And you can see over here, these are the attributes. So you have last name, first name, address. And for this people table, these are all the attributes wherein you have determined that the person ID, which is unique, is your partition key. But then a table need not have only something called as a partition key. A table can also have something called as a sort key, right? So this allows you to do a lot of searching capabilities, right? So all the items with the partition key value are stored together and sorted in order by the sort key value. So in a table that has a partition key and a sort key, it's possible for two items to have the same partition key value, right? So over here you can see that we have the artist as the partition key and the song title as the sort key. So again, you can see over here, the artist in the second item also has the same artist name as that of the first item, right? The no one you know is the same. But then ultimately, are both your artist and your song title together unique in nature? That's something that you have to think about. So you can see over here, even though over here in both these items also, you do have the artist name to be the same, your song title is something different, right? So this is called as a partition key and a sort key. And it's together referred to as a composite primary key, because together they have to be unique, right? So the first attribute is your partition key and the second attribute becomes your sort key, right? Cool. Now, when we talk about indexes in high level overview, indexes are something that we already spoke about when we spoke about Elasticsearch that you would have already done right now. So with Elasticsearch, when we spoke about an index, we saw that all the data would be stored within an index, right? So that's similar to what's happening in DynamoDB also. So you can create one or more indexes on a particular table. A secondary index lets you query the data in the table using an alternative key in addition to your primary key or your sort key, right? And DynamoDB doesn't require that you use indexes, but they give your application more flexibility when you query your data, right? Because these indexes, when you create them, let's say, for example, you create an index that has the artist and the song title, or probably in the previous example, if you create an index that has the artist and the album title, you will be storing all of these items according to that particular index's primary key and the sort key, right? So then what happens over here is you would be able to query based on the artist and the album title rather than the artist and the song title for the table, right? So in that way, indexes store the respective data that you have for that particular index that you create, right? Whether it has a secondary key on the table and so on, right? So you can see there are two types of indexes over here. So you have a global secondary index and then you have a local secondary index. So with a global secondary index, it's nothing but a partition key and the sort key that are totally different from those on the table. So if you take this particular example, when you created this table, you have the artist as a partition key and song title as the sort key, right? So now if you create a global secondary index, what it means is you can create a global secondary index that does not even have the artist or the song title. You could have a global secondary index with the album title and the price, It's totally possible. So now when you start querying on your global secondary index, you can query based on the album title and the price rather than the artist and the song title. So now your queries are much faster. So the way you create the indexes, you have to be pretty strategic regarding that, because your searching performance is based on that, right? So a global secondary index mentions that other than whatever keys that you have on your table, you can choose a totally different set of keys. So that's the reason why I showed you this example, where when you created the table, you had the partition key to be artist and the song title to be your sort key. But then when you create the global secondary index, I can have album title and the price as my global secondary index, right? But when it comes to a local secondary index, this is something that you can create while you create the table, not after you have created the table, right? That's a very important statement. With local secondary index, you can only create this while you create the table, not after you have created the table. Okay, but this local secondary index is a little bit different than global secondary index, because it has the same partition key as that of the table, but then it has a different sort key. So let's say, for example, a local secondary index over here would be like the artist is your partition key, but then your local secondary index has the artist itself as the partition key, but instead of the song title, the local secondary index has album title as the sort key. So now over here you can query based on the artist and the album title rather than doing a query based on artist and song title. So each of these indexes, right, each of these indexes have read write capacity units allocated to it, because that determines as to how much data you can read per second and so on. And again, there is a limit to these indexes that you can create. Each table in DynamoDB has a limit of 20 global secondary indexes that you can create, which is a default limit that you can increase talking to AWS, and 5 local secondary indexes per table, right? So now let's look at the next concept. So you can see over here in this example, so you have the music table, right, where you have the artist and the song title like we discussed before, but then you have a global secondary index that you have created called as genre album title, and over here you have the genre as the partition key and album title as your sort key over here, right? This is pretty cool. Now you can do a query based on this genre album title index, a global secondary index that you have created, where you input the partition key to be genre and your album title to be your sort key. So in that way, these two keys for your global secondary index are totally different than the two keys for your table that you created, right? So artist and the song title were the keys that you created for your table when you created the table, but then you created a global secondary index that has two other different attributes as the partition key and the sort key, right? So this is pretty cool. Now your queries will be much faster because it's going to store only these related data, right, for that particular item. So you have one more concept called as streams in DynamoDB. This is also a pretty interesting concept, because using this you will be able to go ahead and create a multi-master DynamoDB table, right? Which spreads across multiple regions and so on. So that is a prerequisite of creating a multi-master. So DynamoDB streams is a prerequisite of creating a multi-master DynamoDB table. But let's understand as to what streams are. So DynamoDB streams is an optional feature that captures data modification events in the DynamoDB table. So when these data events happen in real time, right? And when these events happen, automatically it's captured. So what are the things that are captured? So whenever a new item is added to the table, the DynamoDB stream captures an image of the entire item, including all of its attributes. So let's say, for example, a person registers on the website, right? And when the person registers on a website where you're using DynamoDB as your backend store, whenever he is inputting certain data, right, and that entire data is being inserted onto this DynamoDB table, the entire data is being captured by DynamoDB streams. Again, so let's say now the person goes ahead and updates his username, right, in the front end. When he updates his username, there is already a data that is stored in the DynamoDB table, which is being updated. That item is being updated. So when the item is being updated, DynamoDB stream captures what was the previous value of that item and what is the new value of that item after the modification was done. It's pretty cool, right? And then the third one is whenever an item is deleted from the table. So let's say a person leaves your organization and you're logging into the software and you're disabling that person, right? So again, it's a delete from the DynamoDB table. If suppose something like that happens, the stream automatically captures an image of the entire item before it was deleted, right? So you get an item being captured when it's added to the table. You get captures when an item is updated, the before and after, and then you get a capture on DynamoDB streams when an item is deleted, right? So this now presents you with a lot of different use cases. So one good use case over here would be, So whenever a new item is inserted into the DynamoDB table, so whenever new people are registering to your website and so on, you could build an amazing serverless based architecture wherein all of your new items that are being added to your DynamoDB table are written as stream records to the DynamoDB stream, from where you can trigger a Lambda function. And when you trigger a Lambda function, you could take the email ID of that person, right? So you can see over here, we do have the email ID of the person which is being inserted. And you could take the email ID and send out a welcome email. So this is one thing that we saw in the architecture when we studied about Lambda's architecture, right? Creating a serverless based registration website and so on. So you can see that's very much possible because you have this capability of DynamoDB streams, which is going ahead and capturing the new insertion into your DynamoDB table. And when that new insertion happens, automatically you can go ahead and trigger a Lambda function. Again, you have to write the code for this Lambda function using any programming language, using Python or Node.js and so on, wherein you talk to the DynamoDB API and find out what item was added. And that event is automatically going to be sent to the Lambda function. And when that event is sent to the Lambda function, the entire attribute list is going to be sent to the Lambda function. And out of which one of the attributes is the email address. Now you could use a simple Lambda function to go ahead and send out a welcome email, probably using SCSS templating format, right? So you could create your own customized welcome email template in Amazon SCS, and then automatically send out an email to that respective person, right? Using a registered domain or probably individual registration of email addresses. I would recommend registering an entire domain for Amazon SCS. So this is a pretty interesting use case when DynamoDB streams come into play. So the next, I would say improvement to DynamoDB streams that you could possibly do is enable global tables for DynamoDB. And when you enable global tables, you can specify multiple regions other than your source region where you would like a copy of your data to be there, right? And this is very useful for disaster recovery, right? So if suppose your primary region has failed, which is Northern Virginia, you would still have all of your data in your secondary region, right? And this is pretty cool. And you can use streams because streams is a prerequisite of that, right? And so over here, another architecture is created wherein whenever all of your data is inserted into your source DynamoDB table, automatically all of that data is automatically being synchronized, replicated to your global table which is residing in another region, right? So if suppose my primary region is Northern Virginia and my another region is Mumbai, right? All of the data that I enter into Northern Virginia will automatically be stored in Mumbai. It's pretty cool. Amazing architecture, right? So when something like that happens, now if suppose what happens if I insert into Mumbai, will it be replicated to Northern Virginia also? That's the reason why DynamoDB is called as an multi-master database, because how many ever copies of the database you may have, let's say people in the Mumbai office team are updating the Mumbai table, and then the Northern Virginia office people are updating the Northern Virginia table, automatically all of those are going to be in sync with each other because you enable streams with global tables. So that's how DynamoDB becomes a multi-master database wherein you can input your data into any one of your DynamoDB tables residing across all of the regions. And that's pretty cool, right? So that's, that's where we come to global table. So global table is a collection of one or more replica tables, all owned within a single AWS account. A replica table is nothing but is a single DynamoDB table that functions as part of a global table. And each replica stores the same set of data items, right? And DynamoDB streams is a prerequisite that you'll have to enable in order to enable global tables, right? So in order to keep all of your data tables in sync, these are the three attributes that are added for every item. And you can look at the item in your DynamoDB table and you'll be able to see these attributes, right? And they specifically say do not modify these attributes, but I think I was able to see these attributes in the year of 2017, but I'm not able to see this right now, which means it's really good that they have kept it under the hood because you don't want anyone to mess up with these values, right? Because the synchronization will then not happen. So now you have consistency models for DynamoDB also, like how you had consistency models for S3, right? So you have in S3, you do have the read after write consistency, which is called as immediate get after put. And then you have your eventual consistency, right? Wherein you have to wait for at least within a second where your data is going to be replicated across multiple availability zones, right? So similarly over here in DynamoDB, we do have eventual consistent reads, and then we have strongly consistent reads. So by default, what is enabled for you is a eventual consistent read, right? So again, while reading data from DynamoDB, a user can specify whether they want the read to be eventually consistent or strongly consistent, right? So when it comes to eventually consistent read, you do know it's similar to that of S3, that the consistency across all copies of your data is usually reached within a second. So repeating a read after a short period of time should return your updated data. But when you go for strongly consistent read, right, in order to eventual consistent, it also provides the user the flexibility to control to request a strongly consistent read. So what happens over here is a strongly consistent read is used whenever you want to read and return a result that reflects all of the writes that was received as a successful response prior to the read, right? So that's called as strongly consistent reads, and eventual consistent reads is something that we configure by default, right? So when we look at certain problem statements, you will understand as to where eventual consistent and strongly consistent reads will come into play. So that is on the last slide, right? We will look at that. But before that, let's look at their in-memory caching engine, right? So their in-memory caching engine is called as DAX, and it's a fully managed, highly available in-memory cache for DynamoDB that delivers up to 10 into performance improvement for your DynamoDB table. Again, it goes from milliseconds to microseconds latency, even at millions of requests, right? And DynamoDB does all of the heavy lifting. You don't need to, modify any of your code, right? You don't need to modify any of your application logic because it's compatible with any existing DynamoDB API calls, and they have that internal logic in the background that caches some of your frequently accessed queries in DAX or any time-consuming queries in DAX and so on, right? And it can be just provisioned within a few clicks on the AWS Management Console or even by using the AWS SDK. So for your exam perspective, just remember that there is something called as DAX for DynamoDB in order for you to have that in-memory caching feature in order to deliver that kind of performance from milliseconds to microsecond based latency and so on. So now for your DynamoDB, like how much data can you read, how much data can you write? So all these are determined through your read and write capacity units, right? So let's look at a particular use case over here. So for example, suppose that you create a table with 10 provisioned read capacity units. This allows you to perform 10 strongly consistent reads per second, because when you go for strongly consistent, it is into one of that many read capacity units that you provision, right? So if you have 10 read capacity units, you will be able to perform 10 strongly consistent reads per second. But then when you go for eventual consistency, where you are at least waiting for a second until the data is being updated, right? You will be able to do twice that, which is 20 eventual consistent reads that you will be able to do per second for items up to 4 KB. So when you're reading data from DynamoDB, always remember it's 4 KB of data that you're reading for every 4 KB of data. So therefore, in the next example, you can see that, for example, a strongly consistent read of an item that is 8 KB in size, right? It's 8 KB in size. That means for one read capacity unit, you'll be able to read 4 KB of data, right? So that means 4 KB into 2 is 8 KB. So which will consume 2 read capacity units, right? If you're doing a strongly consistent read. But then if you're going for eventual consistency, right, at the same time, divide that by 2. You will only need 1 read capacity unit, because with eventual consistent, you are waiting for a little bit of time. So you have to divide that by 2, right? And then next example is, if suppose you talk about write capacity, right? So you can write up to 1 KB per second. So therefore, if suppose you want to write 100 KB per second of data, right? That means you need to have 100 write capacity units, right? If you have 10 write capacity units, you'll be able to do 10 writes per second for items up to 1 KB in size, right? So it's for write, it's always 1 KB in size. For read, it's always 4 KB in size. So let me, talk about more regarding this, a little bit more scenarios for you. So if suppose, let's say you are writing at least 1 MB of data per second, right? And if you're doing 1 MB of data per second, which is 1024 KB, you will at least need 1024 write capacity units, right? But when it comes to read, so if you read 1 MB of data, right? So 1 MB of data, which is 1024 KB, you will have to divide that by 4 KB, right? And when you divide that by 4 KB, you will get to know as to how many read capacity units you will actually require. And that will be equal to the number of strongly consistent reads. And then when it comes to eventual consistent, just divide that by 2. You will get your eventual consistent amount of capacity units that you'll have to spend. So 1024 by 4 would be, let's do it in Google. So let's see. Let's do 1024 by 4. So this is, it's 256, right? So that means you will actually require 256 read capacity units for strongly consistent, and 256 by 2, it's equal to 128 for eventual consistency, right? So again, let me give you this problem statement. So let's say we are doing 1000 1024 kilobytes that we are writing in 1 second to DynamoDB, right? Which is equal to 1 MB. So in that second, how many read capacity units would we require? So if you are going with strongly consistent, you would need at least 256 read capacity units in order to read 1024 kilobytes of data. But then if you're going with eventual consistency, you will need only 128 read capacity units, because for every 4 KB you're writing per second, you'll have to calculate. But when it's write capacity units, if you're writing 1 MB of data per second, which is 1024 kilobytes per second, and your write capacity units can support only up to 1 KB per second, then you will at least need 1024 write capacity units in order to write 1024 KB of data per second, right? So you will have to determine all of these uh, much beforehand in order to get started with DynamoDB, because you will have to provision these read and write capacity units. But then you could also do one thing: you can create alarms in CloudWatch, and that alarms in CloudWatch will be monitoring your read and write capacity units for your DynamoDB table. And then based on which, if suppose the threshold crosses a particular limit of 10 or 15 read capacity or write capacity units that are being consumed, you can configure auto scaling for that in order to increase your read and write capacity units on the fly, right? So that is on demand. And at the same time, you can also go for provisioned read and write capacity units, which you create at the start itself, right? So let's look at all of these concepts from a practical point of view, and then we will also do one very nice uh, serverless based application with Lambda, API Gateway, and DynamoDB, right? So let's go ahead and look at DynamoDB on the console. So you can see over here, I've just created a new table called as books. But then how do you create a table, right? So you go to here to click on create table, and you can see you have to give the table name over here. So let me call this as movies. And you can see it's asking for a partition key. I'm just going to call it as ID. But then the sort key I'm going to give is going to be my movie name. Right? I'm going to call this as the sort key. And you can choose different data types, which is string, binary, and number. Right? And you can see over here under the table settings, your provision capacity is right now set to 5 reads and 5 writes. Right? And these are the default settings. But you can modify these default settings and add your secondary indexes over here, which are your local secondary indexes. These are not your global secondary indexes. So when you add your local secondary index, the partition key should be the same as that of your table's partition key, which is which is ID, right? And you can also add a sort key, which is something different. So for movie, it could also be the director name, right? So over here, I'm creating a local secondary index, right? So I'm creating this as a local secondary index, wherein we have the partition key to be the same as that of the table, which is ID, and the sort key to be something different from that of what was there from when we created the table, right? So you can see over here, the type is LSI, and the ID is the same. The partition key is the same as that of the table, but then my sort key is something different, right? And again, over here, you can go with provisioned or on-demand capacity, right? So when you go with provision capacity, you can by default say that over here, your provision capacity for under the free tier eligibility criteria is only 5 read capacity units and 5 write capacity units. So now let's say over here, we will have another calculation over here with another problem. So we are going to read 256 kilobits of data per second. So 256 kilobits of data per second is 256 by 4 KB, which is 64. So that means we will need 64 read capacity units for reading 256 kilobits of data per second in strongly consistent, and that divided by 2. So this is 64. Now this divided by 2 will give you for eventual consistency, which is 32 read capacity units for 256 kilobits of data, right? But if you're going with write capacity units, the same 256 kilobits of data, you will need 256 write capacity units in order to insert 256 KB of data per second. So now you can see over here, taking this 5 and 5 into consideration, with 5 read capacity units, what's the maximum I can do? With 5 write capacity units, what's the maximum I can do? With 5 write capacity units, I can write only 5 KB of data per second, right? And with 5 read capacity units, I'll be able to go ahead and read, let's say 10 KB of data. I think not 10, it'll be 20 KB of data. So I'll be able to read 20 KB of data in a strongly consistent fashion. And I'll be able to go ahead and read 40 KB of data, 40 KB of data in eventual consistent manner. So that's the kind of calculation that you have to think about. So you have to always assess this in order to before go ahead and right configuring your table with that kind of capacity. But then they also provide you with the auto scaling capacity of read capacity and write capacity. So you can see over here we have the target utilization, the minimum provision capacity, and the maximum provision capacity. You can enable auto scaling too for your DynamoDB table. So if it's breaching more than 70% of the utilization, you can go ahead and provide this read and write capacity units to be much more. So let's say if it's going greater than 70%, I'm going to go with 40 read capacity and 40 write capacity units, and this will be applicable to both the global secondary indexes that you create for this DynamoDB table. And you need to authorize DynamoDB in order to go ahead and do this scaling on its own on behalf of you, right? So therefore you need to provide an IAM role. And encryption address, you can see by default the key is owned by DynamoDB, but then you can provide your own customer managed key, or you can choose AWS's DynamoDB's key which they have created for you, right? So we're going to leave these as defaults, and then let's go ahead and create. But we already do have a table that we have created which is called as books, right? And in this table you can see over here all of the details regarding the table. And we are going to in a little bit of time we are just going to enable streams, and I'm going to show you as to how this works. But then you can see under the items tab on the top, you can see the scan is based on only the books and the ID, right? It's only based on your primary key, right? And because we don't have a sort key on this table, we only have a primary key. So let's go ahead and add a new item to this table. But instead of doing that over here, I'm just going to do it through a lab from Lambda functions and so on. So that lab is pretty interesting. So let us do it from there. But then you can go ahead and create an item from here, and then you can give the string a value. So let's say I'm just giving it as item as 1, and I'm clicking on save. So you can see over here one has been saved. You can also click on this and click on actions and click on delete. And you can take an entire row, or you can choose multiple records in your table and also export it to CSV format and so on. And you can also manage the TTL in DynamoDB. So for how long your data is going to reside in your DynamoDB table. So you can see over here, we can search only based on ID, but then in a few moments, we'll be creating a global secondary index, and you will see that also being listed over here. Other than the scan query, I mean, you also do have the query feature over here, where you can just, I mean, have a nice GUI where you can insert the values and so on, right? So now regarding metrics, you can see over here, these metrics are provided by CloudWatch. So you'll be able to see the read capacity, I mean, the 5 which is showing over here, and the write capacity over here, any kind of throttle events that are happening, what is your latency in regards to get and put, and so on. So all of these can be, seen from CloudWatch point of view, yep, because that's providing you with the metrics. And regarding alarms, this is something that we created, which was created when the table was created. So this is our read capacity units and write capacity units alarm for in terms of auto scaling, right? And you can go ahead and create your alarm from here, right? You can also choose to send a notification to an SNS topic while doing this. I think it's pretty similar to what we have done with auto scaling for EC2 instances. And now when we go to the capacity, you can see over here, we are on the free tier eligible provisioned capacity, but then you can also go with on-demand capacity. That's also possible. So over here, they are describing that select on-demand if you want to pay only for the read and writes that you perform with no capacity planning that you have done before itself, right? But with provision capacity, you have done the capacity planning, and you are going with an estimated cost of $2.91 per month based on the read and write capacity units that you provision over here. And at the same time, you can also do auto scaling for the same, which we have anyway studied in the previous tab, right? So now when it comes to indexes, we can go ahead and create a global secondary index over here. We can't create a local secondary index over here. So let's create a global secondary index. So let's call this as so we are creating a partition key called as book name and the sort key called as author name. But probably I would suggest the partition key to be genre, like how we studied. So because this can be unique, I mean, this can be the same across multiple items in the table, but then together these two guys have to be unique, right? So that's something that we have to think. But this is a global secondary index, and we don't have to consider that for here. But when you create the table, you have to think about that when you use a partition key and a sort key, both together have to be unique, right? And you can see over here for your global secondary index also, you are going to provision read and write capacity units because you're going to do searching and sorting based on the global secondary index. So let's go ahead and create this index. So it'll take a little bit of time for it to create, but anyways, by the time that we complete all of these, we'll be able to see that. And you can see over here, global tables are there, but the prerequisite to creating a global table is to ensure that streams are enabled. So let's do that right now. So let's go to the overview tab. Let's go ahead and click on manage stream. Let's go ahead and choose new and old images, which means it will go ahead and capture everything, right? That's what we want. Let's go ahead and click on enable. So now when streams are enabled, you can go to global tables and then go ahead and add a region. So I'm going to add another region, which is Mumbai. So region is ready. We can go ahead and click to create the replica. So let's just wait for a second. So it's giving us an internal server error, probably because Mumbai region is not being activated. Yeah, so maybe let's add another region, which is somewhere in the US itself. So this is a pretty brand new account. So let's do that. Let's do Oregon. Yeah. So table write capacity should be either paper request or auto scale. So this is one other prerequisite that you have to do. I think we enabled auto scaling. So let us just check that. Okay, so we haven't enabled. So let's go ahead and enable auto scaling for this. So again, over here, I don't want to go with 40,000. So I'm just going to go with 400. Yeah. Click on save. So let's wait for a second. Okay, so auto scaling is enabled. So again, you can see over here. So let's see whether it's still in the updating status. It has been updated. Okay, so I think it's still creating the GSI. So that's taking a little bit of time. Okay, but anyways, let's go ahead and try to enable this time. So let's go with Oregon region, something that we have activated at least. So okay, so it's creating the replica. It's cool. So now if we go to DynamoDB in the Oregon region, the replica will be created, but then we will have to wait for a little bit of time. So it'll take a little bit of time until it goes ahead and reflects over here. Let me just open up Oregon in the new tab, right? So you can see over here, it has still not yet listed over here because it will take a little bit of time for it to show up on the console point of view. So we'll just wait for that, not a problem. Since we have enabled it, it should work. I think it's still caught in the index creation part of it over here. Okay. So now when it comes to backups, you can go ahead and create a backup over here. And you can go ahead and give the backup a name and choose your respective table, and you'll be able to create a backup. And you can also go ahead and restore your backup, and you can restore a point in time backup. So you can specify the exact date timestamp in order for you to restore your data up to that point of time. So all of these probably would be stored in S3. I'm not sure, you could check your documentation on that. So even snapshots and backups are available for DynamoDB. And then you have something called as triggers over here, wherein you can trigger a Lambda function, right? And you can go ahead and trigger this Lambda function in order whenever the stream captures any data, right? So since you have enabled stream over here, since you have enabled stream, you can go ahead and choose to trigger Lambda functions from your streams, right? So you can see over here, DynamoDB triggers connect DynamoDB streams to your Lambda functions. So whenever an item in the table is modified, which we have studied, like whether you want to capture all of the data or the previous data and the new data whenever a item in the table is updated, or whether you want to capture the data as to what happened when an item is deleted, right? Before it was deleted, you want to capture that. So all of these you can capture and trigger Lambda function from here. And when you're triggering a Lambda function from here, like we discussed, you can go ahead and do multiple number of use cases from there, right? It's very much possible. It's pretty cool. And then you have access control over here. So this is also another use case for DynamoDB, wherein let's say, for example, you are writing a mobile application, right? And in this mobile application, you are using an federated identity. You're not using something along the lines of just username and password or email ID and password. You're using something alongside of Google login or a Facebook login or an Amazon login and so on. If you use some kind of a login like that, it's called as web identity federation, right? And you're federating your identity with a web provider or an identity provider who's in the web, like Facebook, Google, or Amazon. And when you do something like that for your mobile based application, and your backend store for your mobile app is a DynamoDB table, your IAM role will anyways have access to DynamoDB. But then what kind of actions can that mobile application do when it goes ahead and retrieves data from DynamoDB? Will it be able to do batch get item, which is getting all of the items in your DynamoDB table as a batch, right? Or will it be able to write a lot of data as a batch write item permission? Or whether it will be able to delete items, or again get item or put item, or whether it's able to do certain queries on your DynamoDB table, right? So you can go ahead and create a policy for this, and you can associate this policy with an IAM role. That's possible, right? And associate this policy. So you can see over here, attach policy instructions are given over here in order to attach this policy to an IAM role, right? You can create your policy from here and attach it to an IAM role, and that IAM role will be the one that is assumed whenever a person logs in with this federated identity. So it's a pretty amazing topic in itself. Yeah, so it may come up in your exam. So it's possible that you're working with federated identities and you would like to provide access to a DynamoDB table. You would do that by creating a policy over here and attaching the policy to your IAM role, right? Cool. And then finally, you do have tags for your DynamoDB table. So this again, we have seen as to why it's very important when we talk about the cost aspects and so on, right? Okay, cool. So now let's just see whether that index has come up. So the index is up, right? So let's look at our global tables. Okay, it's still not reflecting over here, but let's just see if it's reflecting over here in Oregon. So even in Oregon, it's not listing, but it's still in progress. So let's just see over here. So the table status is updating. So probably it'll take a little bit of time until we see that complete, right? We see the global tables complete. So it generally takes a lot of time. So in the meantime, what we are going to do is we are going to learn about a specific use case with serverless based architecture, wherein we are going to write a Lambda function in Node.js programming language, which is going to go ahead and write data to this books table, right? And then we are going to go ahead and trigger that Lambda function from an API gateway endpoint. So you will now see as to how do you create CRUD based applications, right? So now you can see over here, both Northern Virginia and Oregon are both in the active status. So this just updated right now. So I haven't stopped the recording or started the recording for this to happen. So it is perfectly updated. So now let's just look at Oregon. Yep. You can see the books table over here. It's active. It's brilliant. Okay, cool. That's great. So now let's go ahead and do that architecture that I showed you. So let's go ahead and first create an IAM role for us, which is going to access DynamoDB, right? So I have opened up IAM in a new tab. Right? So now you will totally understand DynamoDB in its true nature. So let's go to users. Sorry, let's go to roles because we need to create a role for Lambda. So let's go ahead and click on create role. And we are going to choose Lambda over here. And let's go ahead and click on next permissions. And just for simplicity purposes, just for the demo purposes, I'm going to give DynamoDB full access. But then if you're working for an organization, always try limiting access to DynamoDB, including the read and write operations that you would like to do. And at the same time, specify a condition wherein you can interact only with that DynamoDB table from that Lambda function, right? So that is possible by using conditions in your IAM policies, right? But for demo purposes, we are going to go with full access. Click on next tags and let's review. I'm just going to call this as Lambda DynamoDB or just a serverless role. So let's go ahead and click on create role. Sorry. So once your role is created, so the next thing that we are going to do is go to Lambda. And we are going to author our own function over here. So we're going to create our own function. So you can see the DynamoDB table is in Northern Virginia. So your Lambda is also in Northern Virginia right now. Let's go ahead and create a function. Let's do author from scratch. I'm just going to call this function create book function. I'm going to use Node.js 10. And under permissions, I'm going to go ahead and use an existing role. And that existing role is my serverless role that I created. So why does this role only show up over here and not any other roles, right? The only reason is because you can see over here, the AWS service that is supported is Lambda. And all the others, you can see the AWS supported service is something else. And that's the reason why you see only this role in Lambda over here. And that is called as the trust relationship of your Lambda function. So you can see over here, the trust relationship is lambda.amazonaws.com. But if you would like this role to be used for an EC2 instance, you could change your trust relationship to also include ec2.amazonaws.com, right? So now going back to your Lambda function, we are choosing our serverless role. Let's go ahead and create the function. And now you can see we do have this code over here. Let's just go ahead and test this code first, whether to see whether it returns hello from Lambda for us. So let's go ahead and click on test. Now it's going to ask us to create a test event. I'm just going to call this as create book. And I'm going to leave this as an empty JSON. Click on create. And I'm going to click on test. So now you can see over here on the top, we will be getting the success statement, right? So you can see over here, the response is 200
It's perfect. It's working fine, right? So even the execution details over here, succeed and status, right? So now let's go ahead and add some code into this Lambda function. So I do have the code written up. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this code. So in this code, you can see over here, we are generating a random identifier because our table has an ID field, right? Which is our primary key or our partition key, right? And we are generating a random ID over here, right? And then we are using a document client of Node.js library in order to connect to a DynamoDB. And then over here, you can see we are giving the table name as books, and we are giving an item, which is the generated UI ID for the ID, right? And the title is something that we pass from the event, right? So from the event is what we pass as the title. So you can see over here. Okay, so when we come more down, you can see the data, and you can see the insertion of the data into the DynamoDB table. This is a post request that we are doing. And if it's successful, we are going to get the response code as 200. If it's not successful, we're going to get the response of 500, right? And we are going to get the error. So this is a try catch exception that we have returned over here. So now let's go ahead and test this out. So let's just save this and test it out with the event that we have. And you can see it exited at error, right? So now let's go ahead and give it an input data, right? Let's go ahead and give it an input data. So let's give it a title and let's see. So we'll configure our test events. Let's go ahead and give it a title called as Harry Potter, and let's see. Let's click on save. Let's click on test. So you can see over here, the status code is 200, and you can see on the top, status code is 200. Now let's go back to our DynamoDB table and see whether it has inputted that item. So let's go ahead and refresh. So we do have a randomly generated ID, and we have the title that is inputted called as Harry Potter. And now when I talked about the global secondary index, you can see over here, we do have the scan and query, but then over here, we do have two options. So I suppose that should also show up. Okay, so it's only showing the books, but let's change this to query. And you can see still it's showing only book over here because we do have the partition key. But let me see as to how we will be able to do the search based on our global secondary index. So yeah, we don't have the author name, right? So that's the reason why it's not genre, and the author name we don't have. That's the reason why it's not showing over here as one of the searches. So you should have those two columns over here in order to search based on your global secondary index, right? So that's something that you can try out. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to do, since we have this create book, let's go ahead and create a new function called as get books, right? So let's go to functions and let's create a new function, and let's just call this as get books. So now this time we are not inserting any data to the DynamoDB table. We are getting data from the DynamoDB table. So I'm going to choose Node.js 10. And over here, I'm going to use the same existing role that I have. Let's go ahead and create this function. So now again, I'm going to modify this code with the code that I have written. So let's just modify that. Okay. So let me paste this code over here. So all that we are doing over here is we are connecting to the DynamoDB table, right? The table called as books. And then we are directly scanning and returning all of the data items under the body. So, and then if suppose it's successful, we are going to get a 200 response. Otherwise, we are going to get a 500 response. So let's just save this and run it. So right now we should get Harry Potter. So let's create a test event for this get items. And we're just going to leave it as empty. So we don't have to pass anything for this. Let's click on create. Let's click on test. So you can see over here under the body, you see the ID and you see the title as Harry Potter, right? So now we will take this up a notch. We will take this to the next level, and we will also integrate API gateway to this. So let's go ahead and create an API gateway resource. So let's go to API gateway. And we'll be studying about this in more detail, but right now from the lab point of view, let's just understand how this works, right? So we are going to go ahead and create a REST API because we are going to work with REST based capability, which is called as representational state transfer. It's a standard for the web that we are going to use. Let's go ahead and click on build for REST API. So I'm going to give my own name to the REST API, right? So I'm going to create a new API. I'm going to give the API name as books, right? And I'm going to keep it as regional endpoint. I'm not going to keep it as edge optimized endpoint where I need to have CloudFront and all that. I'm going to keep it as regional endpoint. But when you choose private endpoint, you have to create a VPC, right? You have to specify the VPC endpoint ID. But we are going to go with regional endpoints, and we are going to go ahead and click on create API. And once we create this API, the first step is to create resources. So let's go ahead and create a resource first. And let's call this resource as book, or probably books, why not? So just call this as books. And then we'll go ahead and click on create resource. So next thing that we will have to do is map methods to this. So we are doing a get method when we are getting all of the books. And we are doing a post method whenever we are creating new books, right? And so let's go ahead and create a method over here. Let's call this as get, right? Let's use the get method over here. Click on the tick mark over here. So now you'll be able to choose the Lambda function. So I'm just going to call this Lambda function as get books, right? I'm going to go ahead and click on save. And now it's going to ask us whether this API gateway has enough permissions to invoke your Lambda function. It's going to create an IAM role in the background, right? And that's pretty cool because API gateway does it for me, right? I'm going to go and click on OK. So now when it has set up this integration, the next stuff that we are going to go ahead and do is go ahead and create a post. So let's go ahead and create another method, and let's call this as post. But this time for the post method, it's a little different than the get method because you're passing event details to the post method. So therefore, we are going to choose this to be a Lambda proxy integration because we are sending events to this particular API endpoint. And again, we are going to choose our Lambda function to be create book, right? So for the post, since we are passing event details, we are going to choose it to be of type Lambda proxy integration. But for get, since we are just getting details from the DynamoDB table, we don't have to actually use Lambda proxy integration for that. So let's go ahead and click on save. Again, it's going to ask us for delegating permissions to this API gateway in order to go ahead and invoke your Lambda function for you. Click on OK. So now since both of these resource methods are set up, let's go ahead and deploy this API where we will automatically get an HTTPS endpoint that we can invoke. So let's go ahead and deploy this API. I'm just going to give it a new stage called as prod. I'm going to go ahead and click on deploy. So now I'll get an API gateway endpoint over here, right? And this is my API gateway endpoint that I'm going to invoke. So let me copy this. Let me go to the browser, right? Let me go to the browser and paste this. So it's saying missing authentication token because you are not specifying your entire endpoint. What's your entire endpoint? Slash books, right? So let's put slash books to this and fingers crossed. Let's see if it works. So you can see over here, it works. It has got out the ID and the title called as Harry Potter, and the status code is 200, right? So this works. So let's go ahead and post some data into DynamoDB. So let me open up Postman if I do have that, right? So this is an REST API tool. It's really good for testing your REST APIs and so on. So I'm going to go ahead and do another post request over here, but this time to this endpoint. So let me just copy this endpoint. I'm going to do a post request to this endpoint. And at the same time, I'm going to pass a body to this post request. And I'm going to do, I'm specifying it's of type JSON, right? And let me go ahead and copy that JSON. So I'm just going to present only this title, right? So now let me send a post request to this endpoint. So you can see over here, it returned a status of 200 OK. Let's go ahead and do another get request to this endpoint and see if both those book details are sent back. So you can see over here, Harry Potter is sent back, and also Lord of the Rings that we sent is also sent back. Let us send one more and see. So let's do another post request. Let's go to the body. And let's probably send my favorite movie. So that's my favorite movie of Rajinikanth. So let me go ahead and send this. And let's do another get request. So now you'll be able to see 3 IDs over here. So 3 IDs and 3 movie names that are inputted, right? So now you can go back to DynamoDB and you can just check over there. Obviously, if it's returning, it should be there, right? But not only over here, even in the DynamoDB table that is in the Oregon region, it will be there. Now, isn't that pretty cool? So let's go to the Oregon region's DynamoDB table and let's go to items. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. This is amazing. This is in the Oregon region because you have enabled DynamoDB streams with global tables that not only your source data has that, source database has that, your destination database do also have that, right? So now this is pretty cool because now you have that, multi-master database, and you do have this table in another region. And in terms of failover and recovery strategies, you are pretty set up good right now. So now you can see over here, we also have that in-memory caching engine that we can create called as DAX. So I would like you guys to just go ahead and create a cluster in DAX for your DynamoDB table and also try that out. So I hope now you understood as to what DynamoDB is. So if suppose I send one more post request, right, with one more column name, it's going to automatically add that column name over here because DynamoDB is horizontally scalable, right? So let me go ahead and create another item and show you. So let me create another item with the ID value of 1. I just want to keep it simple. And let me go ahead and do another insert of a string. So it does it on top. So let me just remove this. Let's do an append of a string. And this field is called as name, right? Or title. That's what we called it right now. So title, again, I'm just going to put another movie name over here. And we are going to append one more field over here. And let me call this as yeah, it doesn't matter whether he directed the movie or not, but I'm just showing you that over here, when you keep adding more columns, right, and you click on save, you can see over here, it automatically added that row as well as that column over here. So you don't have that kind of constraint wherein the constraint that you have with relational databases, where you have to follow a particular schema in the sense like your table should have only this many column names, and those column names should always match with the data that you're entering, right? That's not the case when it comes to DynamoDB, because this is horizontally scalable. The more amount of data that you keep sending it, the more amount of data that keeps adding, right? The more columns that are created. Let's go ahead and delete this because I just don't want to have it as inconsistent, right? And at the same time, we can go ahead and choose all of these columns and then go ahead and export to CSV. So we'll get our books.csv. Let me just open it up and show you guys. So you can see over here, automatically it gave you a CSV file of all of the data within your DynamoDB table. So those are the concepts that I wanted to mention regarding DynamoDB. So I hope you guys got all of these concepts into your mind. And please do try out the lab. I'll have this entire code of the Lambda function and the API gateway as part of this lecture as a resource, right? So that you will be able to see that and replicate it by yourself, right? So thanks a lot for listening to this session. Hope it was really interesting. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.